Your ideas help move this country. You are the American Innovator.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the American Innovator. Today we have a very special guest, Art Byrne, who has written a new book called The Lean Turnaround. And Art is an expert among all experts on lean, and we're very lucky to have him on the show today. And Art, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So, it's not often that I get to interview someone who has as much experience with lean as you do. You go way back. You've been doing this a long time, and I don't know how many countries you've worked in and major corporations, including GE. Why don't you give our listeners just a quick rundown on your background and all the companies you work for, because you have a wealth of experience.
Okay, I'd be happy to do that. My lean journey started in 1982. It was my first general manager job at the General Electric Company. I was in the lighting business group there, and my manufacturing guy had gone to Japan a few months before I took over, and at the sponsorship of corporate manufacturing in GE, and he had to do a project and report to them in 6 months of something he learned in Japan. And so he and another guy from the lighting business group who had also gone on the trip and who was a supplier to my business decided they wanted to start a small Kanban process. So that's what we did. We bought a van and we started a Kanban process where the supplier part of the lighting business group would supply my business. And we found that, the truck came every day, and my inventory went from about 43 days down to 3 days and stayed there. And the inventory of my supplier went away totally. They were supplying me quartz arc tubes. So, quartz arc tubes are tricky little products. They're pretty expensive, and they're made in a glass furnace. So you couldn't shut the furnace down. So before, they used to keep this enormous room of all these arc tubes of all the different sizes. And once we started the Kanban, they no longer kept them at all. They just responded to our Kanban pull every day. And then we found that, not only did we reduce inventory, but our quality got better, our deliveries got better, customer service was better, productivity was better, the people were happier, we freed up a lot of space. So based on that, I was really hooked and felt that this is the only way to run a business. Unfortunately, at that time in GE, no one really cared too much about that. The whole thrust was make the month, and that's what we try to do. But it was a recession year, and we couldn't make the month very well. But we delivered more cash flow than we had the year before, even though my sales dropped about 20%. So I was really hooked on this. Then when I left GE, I went to a company called Danaher Corporation, which is now, I think, pretty famous in the lean circles. And at that time, I was a group executive, and one of the companies that I had was a company called Jake Brake. And George Konensaker, who worked for me running Jake Brake, and I, we both had some lean background. We weren't really great at it, but we knew that was the way we wanted to do things. So we started a lean process at Jake Brake, and we had set up our first cell, and we had gotten some momentum. And then Konensaker came across some Japanese consultants that were giving a seminar in Hartford. This was something that Masaki Yamai, who wrote a book called Gemba Kaizen, he had this Kaizen that he was going to do in the Hartford area. So we went over there. I could only stay the first 2 days, but Konensaker stayed the whole week. And after 2 days, we said, these consultants that Yamai brought in, these are the guys we should have worked with. They all had worked for Teiichi Ono directly at Toyota for many, many years. And we said, we just have to have them come work for us. So as Konensaker said, okay, I'll work on that. And he badgered them all week, got them over to the plant one night late, and et cetera, et cetera. And, we first begged them to come and work for us. And they said, well, we're too old. We don't speak any English. It's too far away. But we said, yeah, but we have steaks and we have lobster and we have golf. They like golf. Anyway, they started working with us in Jacobs Chuck and then Jacobs Brake, just those two companies. Both of them were my companies. And that's how we sort of introduced lean into the Danaher Corporation. When we wanted them to move on we had 13 companies in Danaher at that time. I had 8, and my counterpart, John Cosentino, had the other 5. and we wanted them to start helping us in the other factories. And they said, no, we're not going to do that because Jacobs Brake and Jacobs Truck are so bad that we want to get more progress before we do anything. So we had to think about what are we going to do. And we decided to create something called the President's Kaizen, which was a kind of unique idea at the time. But we took all of 13 presidents of Danaher at that time and their VPs of operations. We took them to Japan for a week. We showed them Kaizen at work in different Toyota suppliers and at Toyota. And then we came back, and every 6 weeks we sort of ordered them to go to one of the factories and do a Kaizen for 3 days. And because they were presidents, we couldn't get all the presidents for a whole week all the time, but we could get them for 3 days. And these were incredible events. I mean, we made so much progress in every one of these businesses. And so, then Lean just sort of rolled through Danaher from there on, and it's been a tremendous success in terms of the overall corporation.
I got to stop and ask you a question, though, Art. You're making it sound so easy. I'm just thinking all these people are very successful. They've come to the success they've known by doing it the way they do it. And then all of a sudden you tell them you want them to start doing Kanbans and Kanbans and you want them to start doing Kaizens. I mean, nobody pushed back. Everything it sounds like you just rolled Kaizen out. I've never had that experience before.
Yeah, no, everybody pushed back all the time. As you would expect, they say, we had a lot of cases where they'd say, well, it's not going to work here. It won't work in my business.
Yeah, exactly.
One of my businesses actually was making about 30% pre-tax profit, and they thought they were just, terrific. And trying to get them to do this, they didn't want to do it at all because they said, well, why do we need to do it?
Right.
But then we took them on the walk of shame, and we showed them all the opportunities in their business. And, after the walk of shame, they kind of came around and said, okay, well, we'll work on it. They got tremendous gains out of it. So
the walk of shame, I love that. Tell me what the walk of shame is, because I can imagine what it is, but I don't know that our listeners all know, and I think that's a powerful concept.
Yeah, it's a really powerful concept, and it's really a simple thing, which is just in the case of this particular company, we had the president, we had the head of operations, we had the plant manager, and a bunch of the people leading the Kaizen that week, and it was really nothing more than walking around the plant and stopping in different places and just saying, take a look over here, what do you see? You see people being productive, or are they standing around? Look over in this other direction. What do you see over here? Does this look like a factory, or does it look like a warehouse? It's something that you don't even have to pre-plan it. You can just walk around, and when you see the waste, you point out the waste. Right. And in this particular case, we took them into their internal warehouses, and we started looking through all the boxes and the dates on the boxes. And when they started finding things 2 and 3 and 4 years old, lots of dust on them, after a while they just got so embarrassed. They said, okay, we got a lot of opportunities.
We get it.
And sometimes it takes that. I mean, people will walk through their own operation every day and not see what somebody looking at it from a lean point of view would see, because they take it for granted. It's always been like that. And so, we made a lot of progress and a lot of success at Danaher, introduced it to all 13 companies. And then I left and became the CEO of a company called WireMold. And WireMold was a privately held company in West Hartford, Connecticut. And over the course of about 9 years, we started pretty aggressive Kaizen implementation. We were able to quadruple the size of the company. We increased the gross profit margin by 13 points. We increased the pre-tax earnings by 13 times. And we increased the equity value of the company when we sold it 9 years later by 2,500%. So, and there was lots of, I can give you a whole list of other things that occurred there that were all positive. But
I think those will do.
Yeah.
That
but
works.
I guess I kind of look at it, if you have a situation where, I can show you where you can get a 2,500% increase in your equity value, and you're the CEO and you're not really interested in doing it, then I look at that as, well, you're in the wrong job. Why are you in that job? If your role there is to increase the value for all your stakeholders, and we can show you a method that can do it, and you say, well, but I'm busy right now, I got other things to do and I don't want to do it, then I just look at that as somebody that's in the wrong job. But,
right. So how long did it take you to get your head around lean? So you had that first experience with the Kanbans, and you put those in place, and they seemed to work really well, and you saw it immediately. And that's really not lean. That's just a tool within lean. Am I correct in saying that? You're much more of an expert than me, but I would say that's just a tool, and you saw outrageous results.
Absolutely. It's just a tool. And we saw, incredible side effects and side results out of that. And that convinced me that I wanted to learn more and go further. And then fortunately, running into the Japanese right away in Danaher and having them teach us a lot more of the tools and a lot more of the things you could do. And we forced ourselves to go on the Kaizens and be on the Kaizens. And, by doing that, you really learn what a powerful weapon this was. And because I was doing this I've always done this from the point of view of the CEO. I've always been running a business when I did this. I never did it as the Kaizen promotion guy or the VP of operations or any of that stuff. And so I always looked at it as A, as a strategic weapon, and B, as a sort of unfair competition almost. If you could do this, it's going to be unfair to your competitors. And so I always saw Lean as a strategy, and I saw it as really a sort of time-based growth strategy, if you will, where it's a great way to outperform your competition and grow your business. And so I never looked at it as a tools thing at all. I always looked at it as a strategic thing, very, very strategic thing, something that would help me improve my business. And that's always been the case.
It's very interesting when I hear you speak because, I know a lot of executives, a lot of leaders, a lot of business owners, they're just trying to get that 5% growth per year, that 10% growth, or maybe even maintain in a climate like this. But it sounds to me like for the most part of your career, you've always far excelled the statistical norms because you've had this weapon, as you would call it, of lean. Is that pretty accurate?
Yes, that's very accurate. And the reason is, if you think about it, most businesses, most people, the one thing that they take for granted is their value-adding activities. Mm-hmm. For example, if you went into a business and you said, well, you have a 6-week lead time, and what you're going to be told is, yeah, that's correct, but we've tried for years and years, and we can't get it any better than that, and here's 25 reasons why that's true. So those value-adding activities are taken for granted, and then the strategy is put together to overcome those disadvantages that you have. And as a result, you're trying to make your customer conform to your 6-week lead time all the time.
Right.
Whereas if you look at it from the lean perspective and you say, well, no, we don't need a 6-week lead time. We need a 1-day lead time or a 2-day lead time. And we know what steps to take and what things to do to change that. Then my strategic options improve dramatically when I do that. By changing and focusing on my own value-adding activities and fixing those, I can therefore deliver more value to my customer than the other guy can. And at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. It's can you deliver more value to your customers than your competitors can over long periods of time? And if you can, you're going to grow. You're going to gain market share, and you're going to grow, and you're going to do that even in pretty weak, flat economies like we have right now.
So how would you define lean in 60 seconds? If you were to just meet somebody on the street and you said, hey, you're a lean guru, you wrote a book called The Lean Turnaround, they go, what is lean? What would you say lean is?
I would say that it's a strategic weapon that will allow you to increase the value of your business in a fairly rapid fashion, in a fairly consistent way. And that it's I could also say it's a time-based growth strategy. So it's not a bunch of tools. It's not. One of the things that I think that we've gotten way off the track on is that when we first started out, lean. When I first started, it wasn't called lean. It was just in time, or it was the Toyota production system. And then Womack and Jones came around with lean thinking, and so we had the term lean. And I thought that was a better term. The problem was that we started out as lean thinking, and then it became what we ever commonly known today as lean manufacturing. And I think that's really tragic, because what it does, if you call it lean manufacturing, then even in manufacturing companies, the CEO a lot of time thinks, well, this is a manufacturing thing. I got to delegate it down to my VP of operations. He doesn't think of it as a strategic thing. He thinks of it as something that he can do to maybe reduce his head count or free up a little space or get some inventory reduction or something like that. But he doesn't think of it as a strategy. And so I would say, if someone asked me what's lean, I'd say it's a strategy that can apply to any business. It's not just for manufacturing. It's not a manufacturing thing at all. In fact, my experience is that lean works better in non-manufacturing companies, partly because they've never done much of this kind of thing. And most manufacturing companies have always been working on how to get more productive, where most service type companies have not. Or if they have, the way that they've done it is by trying to automate things on a computer and they never look at the process. They never fix the process steps, and so
That's a
it
great point I think you made, and I've never heard that said before. So that's interesting. As a manufacturer, I'm a manufacturer. I'm always looking at how do I make those widgets a little bit faster, a little bit cleaner, with less waste on the shop floor when I complete the process.
Right.
But yet, in a business environment, an executive environment, in a healthcare, any of those environments where it's not really traditional manufacturing, you said they typically don't focus on processes.
No.
Why have they been separate from that?
Well, it's because of the nature of what they do, and because the way that people work in those kind of environments. For example, a hospital is what I would call a fiefdom environment. It's a silo. Let's call it a silo environment. It's a lot of silos that all act independently. And if you go to that hospital to get something fixed, you got to pass through 8 or 10 or 12 different silos. But each silo is fairly independent, and each silo will try and optimize what it does. So you might wind up with a situation where there's 8 different computer systems working in the hospital, but they won't talk to each other. Eventually you try and fix that, but those things grow up that way.
And why? Why are they? Because they're not connected. The processes are not connected. If you're making a widget at one end, it's supporting the final product at the other end. The car, you're making the alternator. That's more
Right.
connectivity. But so there just naturally is not connectivity, is what you're saying, in
Right.
those environments.
Yeah, I think the natural tendency for everybody, whether you're in manufacturing or whether you're in a service business or whatever, the natural tendency is to batch things. We think that think about addressing Christmas cards, you think that if you line them up and sign them all at one time, and then stuff them all in the envelope at one time, and then lick all the stamps at one time, that's faster than if I did them one at a time,
Right.
complete. And it's not, but that's how we all think. And so, in most cases, if you leave people to their own devices to devise a new process, they're going to create a batch of some kind, and they'll create it in a service company. They'll create it in a manufacturing company. Manufacturing companies, the batches tend to be dictated by the type of equipment that you have and the changeover times, et cetera. So people say, well, this takes me 3 hours to change over this machine. Therefore, my finance guy will figure out for me how many widgets I have to make every time I turn it on, or I'm in a different setup. Whereas the lean guy says, no, it's not going to take 3 hours to change it over. We're going to change it over in 1 minute,
Right.
and therefore we don't have that problem anymore.
Interesting.
So
So it seems also the service industry, they're always thinking to themselves, well, everything I do is different. One phone call is different from another phone call. There aren't any set processes like in manufacturing where Lucy's wrapping the chocolates. I mean, it's always
That's right.
different. So therefore, refining processes doesn't really apply.
that's correct. And they also, if you think of a service company like a insurance company or a bank or something, a lot of the work gets done on different people's desks, right? And so you may have a department where there's the same kind of people, but the work is still occurring on different people's desks. And so let's say that you have a loan application comes into a bank and it has to be processed by 6 different departments. Well, those 6 different departments are on 6 different floors, and it comes in and it goes to different people on each floor, but it batches its way through all that stuff. It'll go in your inbox, it'll go in your outbox, and then it'll sit, and tomorrow it gets delivered upstairs. When it gets delivered upstairs to that department, maybe that person's at a seminar or out on vacation for a couple of days, so it'll just sit there. And so something that takes probably 3 or 4 minutes of actual touch time labor,
Right.
it's going to take 3 weeks to complete. And nothing's happening to it most of the time. It's just sitting there.
No value added.
Yeah. So, but it's much harder in service companies to break that up because people are very protective of their jobs. They're very protective of what they do. That's where their comfort is. And they'll say, well, nobody else can do this but me. Nobody else but my department. If it's in a hospital, if you think about the tests that get done, well, there's a laboratory. And so they send the test to the laboratory. And the laboratory does the test, but it takes a long time to get the results in a lot of cases.
Even though the test probably only takes 15, 20 minutes, maybe a minute or two to actually perform.
Yeah, it takes short time to perform, but it might take 4 or 5 hours to get the results back. Depends on the hospital. Whereas if, let's say that you have a particular specialty in the heart or something. Let's say I did a Kaizen once on a hospital where we were working on discharge process for people that had gone through open heart surgery. And I said, well, do you need some sort of test before these people go home? Do you give them some sort of test? And they say, oh yeah, just about everybody gets this one particular test. And you say, well, is that a problem? They say, yeah, we have to wait 2 or 3 hours sometimes for the lab to send the stuff down to the lab, get it back from the lab. And so it delays the discharge process. And I said, well, why don't you go get a machine, go to the manufacturer that makes the machine that does this test, because they're not doing them manually, they're on some sort of machine, and have him come up and he'll give you the machine, and he'll train your people how to use it, and then you can control the test right here on the floor. Why do you send it down to the lab? Oh, we couldn't do that, because of course the lab would go crazy. They would start screaming, and you can't take this test away from me. We're the only ones that can do it. And so that's why organizations face that kind of problem. And that's also why in service kind of companies or non-manufacturing companies, when you break through those kind of barriers, the results that you can get and what
Are
comes
dramatic.
out of it, fantastic. They're
Okay, so
fantastic.
tell me how you break through.
Well, I think, at the end of the day, there's for any of this stuff to work, three things have to be present when you look at it as a business. The first thing is you have to see lean as your strategy. The second thing is it has to be led from the top. It has to be led by the CEO or the leader or the plant manager or whoever happens to run the particular operation. It has to be the out front, hands-on leader. And the third thing that has to be present is you have to understand that what you're trying to transform or change is the people. And the people are the most important part of the whole thing. And so if you start down a lean path and you start without thinking of those three things, your chances of being successful are going to be really small. Because
Okay, so I got to ask you a question. So you say that really the goal is to transform the people. It's not to do a Kaizen and fix the process. We're trying to transform the people, right?
that's correct.
Did I get that right?
Yep, that's correct.
I know I'm interrupting you, but how do you transform the people? What's the secret sauce in making that happen? You've done it so many times,
Right.
and that's what everybody wants to know.
Right. Well, it's a combination of things, I think. Let's start with leadership and strategy.
Okay.
If people know that your strategy is lean and it's continuous improvement and improving all your value adding things, they at least know what's expected of them. So that's a big step. If the leader is constantly pushing this as sort of the lean zealot, if you will, that's
Right.
constantly pushing this forward, they get the idea that they better get on the train. They better get doing this stuff.
This is not the flavor of the month. It's serious. This is
That's
the
right.
direction of the company.
That's right. And if you don't want to do it, then go someplace else, because this is what we're going to do here, and this is going to become our culture.
And so you're comfortable with that. So basically you just said, hey, if you don't want to do it, get the hell out of here.
Absolutely, because you can't have someone dragging you backwards. And
Right.
I think one of the key roles of a leader is that if he has big resistance from people, in the middle or upper management, the leader has to either get that person turned around or let them go, because they're
Got
going
it.
to drag everybody else backwards. And so then you get to the people part, and the transforming the people. If they understand those rules that I just said, and they understand what we're trying to do, and then you start to teach them and put them on a lot of Kaizens, what can happen, right? And let me give you a couple of examples.
Okay, so but I want to hear the examples, but I want to make sure I'm clear on what you just said. So the first step was, as the executive, you have to get your leadership team aligned. Everybody's in a line, going the same direction, agrees with the direction you're taking the company, and you get rid of those people that don't agree with the philosophy of making lean a strategy. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Then the next step you said was then you have to train people at all different levels throughout the company on what lean is and let them experience a Kaizen so they experience the benefit of it. And then go ahead. Now you,
Yeah.
there
Well,
I interrupted you.
you missed a step in between.
Okay.
First, you have to make sure they all understand that this is the way we're going. This is our strategy.
Okay.
The second thing that's really important is what the leader does, and that the leader has to be really leading this stuff and really talking it up all the time. and
Not
pushing.
delegating it.
Not delegating. It's not like I bring you all in a room and I say, okay, we're going to go down to lean strategy, and I'm going to introduce you to my consultant, and
Yeah.
he's going to tell you about it, and I'll be back this afternoon, and then I leave the room and I come back at 4 o'clock, and I haven't heard a thing he said all day, and the first thing I say is, wow, wasn't that exciting? And they all look at you like, you're not part of this, dude. This is a joke. We're not going to do this. So they need to understand that the leader is really leading this and pushing it. So that's number two.
Okay.
And the third thing is getting the people converted. I think it's a question of getting them on a lot of Kaizens, having them experience this, giving them some training on this. But it's not really a training exercise; it's a doing exercise.
Right.
For example, when I first went to wire mold, we had a lot of different types of equipment. One of which was a rolling mills. We had a bunch of rolling mills to roll big pieces of steel, steel into shapes. And we had one what was called a rafted mill. And I said, well, how long does it take to change this thing over? And they said, oh, 14 hours. And I stood there and I said, well, no, we have to get it under 10 minutes. And of course, they look at you and they say, how do we get this guy as the CEO?
Yeah,
He's an idiot.
exactly.
You can't change this over in under 10 minutes. It takes us 14 hours. It's taken us 14 hours for the last 8 years or 10 years, ever since we owned this machine. So, then we started doing the Kaizens on it. And we did one Kaizen, we did another Kaizen, we altered the machine a little bit. Anyway, long story short, we got it down to 6 minutes, right? Now, 14 hours to 6 minutes, I've got some converts already. I've got converts now.
I bet you do.
That say, well, gee, maybe he's not so nutty after all. Maybe we should listen to this guy on the next one. We took another, and a funny follow-up story to that one about, I don't know, 6 months or a year after we had got it to 6 minutes on a regular basis. Somebody comes in and there was a metalworking magazine where there was about a 5-page article in there about the same exact mill that some company had, the same brand, same size, everything. And they were making parts for the automobile industry, and they were bragging for 5 pages about getting this set up from 14 hours to 6 hours. And my guys came in and said, well, but Art, we're doing it in 6 minutes. And I just said, yeah, be quiet. Don't tell anybody that.
Okay, so Art, again, the strategy that you're laying out is so fabulous. I know I'm probably going to mess it up, but I want to make sure I never forget what you said. So once again, you got the leader that makes sure it's a strategy. This is where we're going. You get the management aligned. You get the people involved in Kaizens for the express purpose of not actually changing the process, but showing them the power of changing the process so you convert them. Did I get
correct.
that? Is that kind of?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, you're going to get all these great process changes and all the benefits from that along the way. But what you're really trying to do is to train your people how to think differently.
Right.
If you think about focusing on, I said before, most companies take their value adding for granted. So as part of this strategy, we're going to be focusing on changing and improving our value adding. Mm-hmm. And when you start looking at the value adding and how do you improve it, I can guarantee you that the best ideas of how to make it better and simpler are going to come from the people that are doing the work.
Right.
But they need some support in that. Probably chances are they've been telling you for years that you ought to do this and why can't we do this, and nobody's listened to them. You've ignored them.
Right.
And now you got a Kaizen process where not only are you not ignoring them, but you're following up and implementing their ideas on the spot. Right now, we're doing this stuff.
Right. So you made a very close distinction because you said you're not going to train them on Kaizen; they're going to do Kaizen.
Right.
Right. And
right.
that was a very important distinction, wasn't it?
Right. It's not. We would give them a little refresher or little tips on what are we going to do like the Friday before a week of Kaizen started. Maybe Friday afternoon for a couple of hours would go through some of the tools and some of the terminology and the sheets we were going to use and all that just to refresh them. But basically, this is all learning by doing. And, when you say, okay, here's the process, and we want to bring the setup time down by a lot, the best way to do that is to do it. And if they got the people on the team that start to do this, and then they just can't believe it. By the end of the week, they're like, wow, I can't believe what I just saw, what we just accomplished. But it really sticks with them. And then they get on the next Kaizen and they have some other great result. And then they get on another Kaizen and pretty soon you're starting to change the culture about how people think about
Absolutely. So here's the question everybody's asking. Real briefly, you go from 14 hours to 6 minutes. How long did it take you to get there? Was that 1 week, 1 year, 2 years?
No, it was probably 8 or 9 months.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure of that, but it was several Kaizens. And of course, we had to keep making product all the time off this mill, so we couldn't always get at it, and we did have to alter parts of it. It wasn't big. It wasn't big capital spending. It was just some roller bearings and some other things, so we could slide the rafts in and out and some other things. But we did have to go through probably at least 3, maybe 4 Kaizens to get it down there.
Okay, so what was the major thing? Because I know everybody's thinking this. What was the major thing, even though I know there was a lot of things that accumulated to get down to 6 minutes, But was there one major concept that changed about the way you changed out this machine?
Yeah, I think the major concept was before in 14 hours they were using cranes and all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
We got rid of the cranes and we just slid these rafts in and out. We just slid them in and when they one person should just grab a raft and move it out and move the next one in. So we made it very easy for them to move around and snap into positions where they were in the exact position all the time. And so instead of cranes and bolting them down and all this kind of stuff, we got rid of all that stuff.
Got
And
it.
and so we were able to do it very, very quickly. It's the same. We also had injection molding machines, and injection molding machines were also changed with a crane when we first started. Took 2.5 hours roughly to change one, and so we said, well, I don't want to use a crane. I want to do it side. I want to side load them, and so we had to alter the machines again. We had to put in some rails so we could slide the molds into the machine, et cetera, et cetera. We had to take the hoses that cooled down these molds, which were on both sides of the machine, and force the operator to run around in circles. We had to mount those on one side of the mold and a bunch of alterations like that. But we got this down to where one guy could change a mold in about 1 minute to 1.5 minutes from
You're
two and a
kidding
half
me.
from 2.5 hours. No, it was pretty consistent. And I have one of my portfolio companies now. Now these were 150-ton molding machines around that size that we had at Wiremo. One of my portfolio companies, they have a plant in Belgium, 750-ton machines, big machines, huge molds, 4.5, 5 hour changeovers when we started. Today, 5 minutes. Can do them in 5 minutes. That took several steps and several alterations, but we got that down. Pretty much all those machines are side loaded and can be changed in 5
Well,
minutes.
as I'm listening to you, I'm feeling guilty because we have Sumitomos, we have injection molding machines at my company, and we use a crane. So obviously, I'm way off the mark, and I know we don't change them out in 5
boy.
minutes. Yeah, I know. So what is it that's inherently not as efficient in a crane versus using? It sounds like a roller table where you just roll the mold into place. What?
That's right. The way we did it, is we dedicated molds to machines, even though we didn't need to. The molds would fit in a lot of
Right.
different machines,
Right.
but we dedicated them to a machine, and we stored them at the end of the machine, if you will.
Got it.
And then we had two roller tables, one that was empty, so that when the old mold came out, we could roll it out onto this table and push it to the side.
Got it.
And then the next roller table was right there. We just slid that up, and then we just shoved that mold in. We had hydraulic clamping to clamp it down, and we were done. It was 1.5 minutes. It was, but we
Unbelievable. What
just
brilliant.
altered it. We got rid of the cranes. We got rid of all this other stuff. We put plenums in to make sure the hoses for cooling and stuff were all on one side, and you didn't have to pull out 6 or 7 hoses. You could pull out one, and it got all the connections were there. So there was some alterations. There was some investment in that particular one. Maybe it was $15,000 or $30,000 a machine to do that. But the time savings and the inventory savings and
And the
everything else-
flexibility that you
Flexibility.
provided the customer was gigantic.
absolutely,
Because instead of pumping a whole bunch of stuff up on the shelf, you could say, "Oh, you want 100,000 pieces or 100? We can pull that off."
it didn't matter. We could go in and out of the same mold, making the same part 6 or 8 times a shift, and it didn't matter to us. It just didn't matter. It only took a minute. So, in fact, I'll tell you a funny story. This is a different machine. This is a 150-ton punch press machine. It was coil fed and a big progressive die in it. And when we started, it was 3 hours and 10 minutes. So we worked on that. We did a Kaizen. We did the next Kaizen, the next Kaizen, the next Kaizen. And anyway, we got it down to where we could do this in 1 minute. The coil change, the die change, everything. Get a good part, last good part, first good part, 1 minute. Sometimes it rolled up to 1.5, 2 minutes, but we did it under 1 minute several times. So AME asked us to give a presentation way back when, and we decided, let's present this die change. And then we said, well, if we're going to present the die change, let's have the two operators do most of the presentation. So this was up in Boston, and the two operators that we had were great guys. They were both from Portugal, so they had a little bit of an accent. But most of the ideas that that got us to 1 minute came from them, and they did the work, and they were terrific. So anyway, we have them do the presentation, and part of their presentation was, gee, I used to climb up on a ladder. Now I don't do that. I used to have to climb under the machine. I don't do that. I used to have to use this wrench. Now I don't do that. All these different things, step by step.
Right.
And in the end, we showed the video, showed the thing being changed over in a little over a minute. And of course, the first question out of one of the audience people, one of the guys in the audience, is he was either a manager or an engineer. He says, "Well, Carlos, you look like you were going awful fast in that video." Now, we hadn't prepared Carlos for this kind of question. We didn't think of it ourselves. But Carlos looked at him like he was an idiot for a second, and then he said, "But only for a minute." Right?
Don't you love it?
Yeah.
Don't you love it?
What this guy was really saying, is, look, I don't have anybody in my business that I can get to move that fast, so I can go home and forget about what I saw and what you told me, because that just looks really hard for me to do. So I'm not going to do it.
Unbelievable.
But the better part of that story really was, here's a guy who was spending 3 hours of a lot of hard work to change over. Now he does it in 1 minute. He fully understands that we made his life better. He made his life better, right? He understands that doing it the Kaizen way versus the old way is way better for him. It's safer, it's easier, it's quicker. And he couldn't understand that showing somebody the difference between 3 hours and 1 minute, and they couldn't get that. And they were managers, right?
It's a scary thing, isn't it?
It really is. But
I got to tell you a funny story that I think you've probably seen, because I know you travel a lot internationally. I know you just came back from Africa. And I have this thing that I'm always seeing waste everywhere I go. And when I go through the security line at most of the major airports, particularly in the United States, the common thing is they have all these big bins that are stacked up, and then they put them on a cart and they roll them back over to the other side, and then everyone pulls out the bins. But in a couple key locations, like I think I see this in Germany a fair amount, I've seen it in Dubai, I've seen it occasionally in Africa, they have like 4 bins. They don't have 30 bins, but they only have 4 bins, and they have a little roller system similar to what you're describing, the injection molding machine, that rolls down the side of the security. So as soon as you're done with the bin, you put it on the roller, it rolls right back to the person that needs it on the other side, and it goes in a perfect flow, and nobody ever has to do anything. It's completely self-sustaining.
I've seen those before, and that you're right. Those, but why people can look at that and not take the idea home. They just don't get it. So
yeah, it's magical when you compare it and contrast it to 40, 50 bins on a PVC cart that people are rolling. They're paying people to do this, and the other one completely does it all by itself.
All by itself, right? Nobody has to walk back and forth, none of that stuff.
So what, in a nutshell, what did you want to achieve in writing this book? Why did you write the book?
Well, I wrote the book because, as I said, I've been doing this for a very, very long time. I was one of the early people in the U.S. doing this stuff, and I've learned a great deal over time. And I really just wanted to share what I learned with other people to see if I couldn't increase the success rate of Kaizen in the U.S. I look at it, and say, gee, a lot of people have tried this or are thinking of trying it, but there's not too many that are really successful, because they have this idea that it's just a bunch of tools, and they can pull the tools out and use them when they want to.
Right.
Or, what you normally see is, because people don't see lean as a strategy, they see it as a bunch of tools or whatever. So they figure they can do this. They can drop a lean system on top of their current batch system, and not change the batch system, not change anything else. And so I just wrote the book because I felt that if I passed on some of the knowledge I've had and how to look at this as a business thing and a strategy, not as a bunch of tools, that maybe I could help a number of companies to be successful where right now they're not. And that was the main reason. The other thing was just to also try and overcome the hurdle that says that lean is a manufacturing thing. When I look at it as a business thing, it's good for any business. It'll work in any kind of business. And so that was really the 2 reasons.
And now you're a venture capitalist. What exactly are you doing now? Because I think that's even interesting.
Well, after we sold Wire Mold, I flunked retirement after 2 days.
Yeah.
And I wound up joining a private equity firm. So now I've been doing that for the past 10 years, and I work with the portfolio companies, trying to improve them and trying to improve the things that we can do there, so that when we eventually sell them, that we get a better return for them. we've had a lot of good successes in that. Done it, I've done lean in probably 14, 15 different countries, 30, 40 different companies over time. So I've seen this just about everywhere. I've done it in hospitals. I've done it in all kinds of different places. So all I was trying to do with the book was to sort of pass on the knowledge that I've learned and try and see if we can't break people of the habit of thinking as lean as a only manufacturing thing, and within that only a bunch of tools, because it's a strategy. And the interesting thing that I found so far from the book is that the comment that I get the most is, gee, Art, you look at lean as a strategy. We all think it's a bunch of tools. And that's to me, it's unusual. I didn't expect that kind of response, but it's also very sad because this is the best strategy you could have.
At my company, we say we are first a lean company, and then we happenstancely make products. We don't even care about the products we make. We only care about how effectively we are doing lean. That our people are fully immersed in seeing waste, eliminating waste, continuously improving, understanding where the value is for the customer. We say that's all we care about. And then magically, when we do that, we make money, our customers are more happy, we make great widgets, everything works out. We are first a lean company, and it's the only thing we care about.
Yeah, and that's the point about making lean your strategy. And I'll give you an interesting example. 10 years ago, Virginia Mason Hospital out in Seattle, Washington, decided they started thinking about this, and I talked to them on a video conference once, and then they brought 30 people to Warmo to see this. This is a hospital. Now they brought the top 30 people came to Warmo for 2 days. They flew from Washington to Hartford, Connecticut, and we spent a couple of days with them. And what I told them to start out with, I said, look, we use raw material that's either steel or plastic, and we run it through a series of processes. We punch holes in it, we attach stuff to it, we put it in a box, and we sell it. You do exactly the same thing, except your raw material isn't steel or plastic, it's a human body. You run it through a bunch of processes, you drill holes in it, you attach stuff to it. You're not allowed to put it in a box at the end, you got to put it in a car, but then you put it in a car and send it home. So it's the same thing.
Wow.
And they got that. It was incredible. They got that. They then went to Japan.
Only because you made it so simple. Who could ever forget that example? That's powerful.
Well, they all laughed, but they got the picture. And then we spent the next couple of days showing them how our processes moved the raw material through the system, right? And they said we can do the same thing in a hospital, and they've done a fantastic job. And I can give you all kinds of statistics on what they've done, but the bottom line statistic for them is in the year 2000, before they started, the hospital made $700,000. In the year 2010, made $41 million. So, and hospitals are under more cost pressure than almost any other business that I know. And so over that 10 years, by making improvements, making things more efficient, doing a lot of good lean stuff, they took their profitability through the roof. But they've also got better patient outcomes, better quality, better you name it. They've improved it. They've been very, very impressive. So it just says you can do this in any business if you think of it as your strategy.
Wow, that is just so profound. I have one last question for you. I could go on and on. I mean, we could learn so much from you. What is the number one characteristic, if there is one, of people that get lean and effectively implement it?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know that if I can give you a number one characteristic.
Right.
I think, though, that it's easier to think of it almost the other way, which is who is unlikely to do this? And then let's come back and try and answer your question that way. I mean, if you're a certain percentage of the population are very insecure people. It's just their human nature. And those same percentage wind up being CEOs at some point. I've worked for several guys that were massively insecure, but they got to a very high position. Now, a guy like that, he needs to control all the outcomes all the time because he doesn't want to be seen as, and lean requires constant leaps of faith. You're going to try something that may not work. You're going to try something where everybody says you're stupid, you can't do this. 14-hour setup, I want it to be under 10 minutes. They all say you're stupid. So you have to be willing to say, no, 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 we're going to do this. The insecure guy wouldn't take the risk. The same is true for the command and control guy. There's a lot of people that manage by sort of command and control. You think about the military or whatever. And the command and control kind of manager, when something goes wrong, the first question that they ask is, who? Who did that? Because they need to punish somebody. They, that's the way they think. And so it's really hard for them to do lean as well. So I think that the ideal guy that does lean is just somebody who says, look, I want to use this as a strategy to improve my business. That's why I'm here. I think it will really work, and I'm going to push it, and I'm going to stay with it. I'm going to take all the leaps of faith. I'm going to take all the risks. I don't care if I fail a bunch of times along the way, but I'm going to keep going after it because I think this will really help me. And there's enough evidence there of people that have been extremely successful. Think about Wirmal, 2,500% increase in equity value over only 10 years. To say that, well, that's worth going after. Yeah. So I think you need somebody who is not afraid to try things, who is. I think you need to be a pretty good people person. You need to relate to your people. You need to get to the level where everybody's on the team. There's no executives, or everybody's sort of just part of the team that does this. And I think that someone like that's a problem solver and someone that wants to be successful, a competitive person, is probably like the ideal person to do lean.
So I translated that by you need someone who's secure and not insecure. You need someone who feels comfortable in their own skin and is not worried about being wrong or being shown up in front of anyone. And you need someone that loves people and believes that people have potential and that they're not the only one in the world that has the answer.
Absolutely, because if you think about it, the one thing that I found over the years when you're going to do lean, you're going to set stretch goals. You have to set a lot of stretch goals. 14 hours to 6 minutes. That's a stretch goal if there ever was one.
Right.
But to me, stretch goals show respect for your people. You're respecting them. You feel that they can achieve things that they don't even think they can achieve. And when they do, to me, the best feeling in the world was to challenge a team with something like that. And when they did it, they felt so great about it. And I think that's the result, the response you're going to get from most people is, oh, we don't want to stretch goals because that'll get people discouraged. And to me, it's just the opposite. If you set stretch goals to encourage people, you set stretch goals because you believe in your people. And when they achieve this stuff, it's fantastic. So if I came to you and you would turn an inventory 3 times, and I said, okay, Paul, you're at first target, you got to get inventory to 20 times. You don't have to do it next month, but over a course of several years here, we're going to get from 3 times to 20 times without blowing the business up in the meantime.
Right.
And so I keep pushing you and I keep harping on you, and I'm kind of a pain in the neck to you, but on the other hand, you kind of understand where I'm going, and so you get to 20 times. Now, if I say that's great, and I don't say, okay, now you got to get to 30 times, you should be disappointed in me, right?
Right. Absolutely.
You think I quit on you or something like that. So.
Right.
But there's not a lot of people that will do that. They don't understand that stretch goals are what drive change and what really help people. They think that if they set stretch goals, people will check out and not want to do it. And it's just the reverse. Everything in lean is the reverse of what we've always been taught.
Isn't it the truth? I say pressure is your friend. I love pressure because it allows me to think way outside the box. It forces me to think outside the box. Yeah. And it uncovers an area that I didn't know I had the potential of working in, and it's very exciting to me.
Right. Well, that's always true, I think. And now you have something to go back and work on, which is side loading your injection molding machines.
Well, I knew already when I was going to interview that I was going to be learning an awful lot because I've been doing this for about 12 years now, and I'm going to write a new book, and it's called Kindergarten Lean, and basically the essence of it is how it took me 12 years just to graduate out of kindergarten in the lean realm, because I've learned so much, but I feel like I'm just barely scratching the surface, and you're an expert
it's interesting.
at a whole different level.
One of my portfolio companies has its biggest part of its operations in Europe, and we have lots of plants throughout Europe. We have them in Germany and France and Italy, Spain, and Belgium, Poland, Czech Republic, all over the place. And so that's become a great team. They've been doing a great job with lean. They're really improving it all the time. And we have a plant managers meeting every December. Mm-hmm. And after 10 years now, we had a ceremony last year where I graduated them to the third grade, which is very high level.
Right. Isn't that amazing? Well, that's the way lean thinkers think, because we know we have so much to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything else, Art, before we end the interview? Anything else that you want to add that we did miss? You've got an incredible book here, and there's so many things we could go on for the next 5 hours. But is there something important that we missed?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered the basics of what has to be in place. And the only thing that maybe we didn't mention was, if you think about the three, I call them the sort of three management principles. Lean has to be your strategy, lead from the top, transform the people. Along with that, the leader has to be pushing, I call it the sort of 4 key lean principles. And that's, work to tack time, one piece flow, standard work, and a pull system.
Right.
If you're pushing those 4 things, you don't have to start out as a lean expert to lead a lean turnaround, but you have to be committed to becoming one yourself as a leader. And if you start by just pushing those 4 things all the time down in your company, every time, are we working to tack time? Is everything in a one-piece flow? Is everybody doing standard work? Do we have a pull system that we can connect the customer directly to the shop floor? Those kind of things. If the lean leader just pushes those 4 things and works within those first 3 principles, you're going to be successful at a lean turnaround. You're just going to be very successful.
Right. So adhere to those major principles, those major concepts, and everything else takes care of itself.
Absolutely. You just keep pushing those things, and everything else will take care of itself. And when you get your people to start to understand this, what you're really trying to do is to go from being lean as your strategy to where lean becomes your culture. When lean becomes your culture, and everybody sees it that way, you're going to be a really hard guy to beat. Your competitors.
It is. And I say it puts smiles on people's faces, because people love to be engaged and people love to be creative, and we often don't create environments where people can be engaged and be creative, and lean changes that. It's a game changer for innovation.
Yeah, it really is. And the nice thing about it is that you hardly ever lose anybody when you're in that kind of environment. We hardly ever lost anybody. Nobody quit. Occasionally, we got written up in lean thinking, we got written up in Gemba Kaizen, we got written up in a lot of books. And so the headhunters were all trying to poach my people. Most of the time, they couldn't get anybody. Occasionally, they'd pick off a young engineer or something. But that guy, most of the time, I'd say over half the time, if we lost a young engineer like that, 6 months later, they'd call us back and say, hey, these guys hired me to help them do Kaizen, but their concept of Kaizen is way off the mark. Can I come back?
Don't you love it?
Most of the time would say, yeah, you're a pretty good guy. Come on back.
Wow. Boy, so much truth here. Unbelievable. Well, Art, thank you so much. The book, The Lean Turnaround, Art Byrne, awesome job. And I personally appreciate learning from you for someone who has so much experience. What an honor and what a privilege. And I hope we stay in touch.
Okay, I'm going to come and check and see if you're side loading.
Oh, give me at least 2 weeks notice. We won't be doing it. I'm going to immediately go back and say, hey, you got to listen to this episode of The American Innovator, because listen to what this guy's doing. And our people are so predisposed to lean, but I think they're going to be a little astounded, frankly, by what you told me. So Great job. Great challenge. Great stretch goal.
All right, well, thanks for having me. It's not a stretch. That's easy.
Okay.
Thanks for having me on, Paul.
You're tough. Thanks,
really
Art. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
It's so amazing how the thoughts bring you.
The American Innovator has been brought to you by FastCap. To hear more, just go to theamericaninnovator.com.